One of the most poignant meetings must have been when Bennelong, who went to Australia, who went to England, having lived in the Manly area all his life and having believed that Sydney Harbour was the limits of the earth. He went back to London with Philip when Philip retired, and George III gave him a coat. And one night at the theatre, he met Mary Bryant in Drury Lane, an escaped convict. And he wept with joy to see her. All the other Aboriginals who went to England with Philip died of the cold, and they're buried in Kent. Very affecting graves.
And when Bennelong came back to Australia, he was in fact ostracised by his tribe and ostracised by whites.
That coat George III gave him destroyed his tribal virtue, and he lost his wife. And he became a sad figure living on government handouts on that point, Bennelong Point. In fact, his story is an encapsulation of what's happened to a lot of Australians, the original Australians. It's such an eloquent summing up of everything that's happened to Aboriginals, all the harm that's been done to them just because of the sort of people we are, just because we have booze, just because we believe in real estate, just because we carry certain viruses in our bloodstream that they don't, or they didn't.
Yes. Symbolic as well, Bob, that that Aboriginal embassy is set up today at there at Farm Cove, just near Mrs. Macquarie's chair.
Yes, highly so, and deliberately so too, and rightly so.
Which is where they believe Philip stepped ashore first.
Yes. And the
great shot then of the people on the Sydney Harbour Bridge as well. What a marvellous view, almost as good as our view from here, they must have.
They don't look to me like sort of flowers and confetti scattered along the points. It looks like an enormous congregation of rosellas, with, I suppose, a few galahs.
That's us. There you go. And some fish as well.
Yeah.
That's the Australian Jazz Orchestra playing at the Sydney Opera House, where they've just released all these magnificent profusion of balloons from Fort Denison, and as they drift slowly through the sky, they make an even greater sight here in Sydney Harbour today. You wonder how many other things there are to do on a day like this today, Peter.
Well, I think it's enough for me to see all these square riggers. Marvellous.
Fingers sailing, man. The Australian Jazz Orchestra, by the way, playing in the forecourt of the Sydney Opera House, was led by James Morrison.
Isn't it interesting? The Brits thought this was a gulag. It looks like Club Mediterranee, not like a gulag.
The worst
it is.
penal colony.
But that was the great adventure of the Australian imagination. In the end, it was the transvaluation of the penal values of the early colony and their resubstantiation into the idea of Australia as paradise, the way that you think, for instance, the way that people think about the bush. In the early colony, the bush was the most feared thing. It was the prison wall. You know, here you were surrounded by this wall of bush or space and air, 14,000 miles thick.
And it was alien. It had
and it was totally alien.
That weren't European.
That's right,
yeah.
and it was horrendous.
The police have never seen crowds like this before. They're estimating that in the city alone, there are approximately 500,000 people. Then when you add all the people on the north side of the harbour, they are estimating a crowd of at least 1 million people are in attendance today for the Bicentennial celebrations in Sydney. And the good thing about it is that the crowd are all well behaved. There have been no reports of disturbances or any outlandish behaviour at this stage, which is really good to hear, because if they got out of hand, it could spoil the whole proceedings.
That's the effect sailing ships have.
Now we're going to the effect sailing. You had to get that plug in.
There were the most curious kinds of attempts at social distinction. For instance, convicts ate fish. Therefore, by the 1830s, it was the habit of upper-class free settlers always to make a point of eating dried or smoked fish, never fresh fish, and always fresh meat, but not preserved meat, which was convict food.
Europeans had already been in America for nearly 200 years. this is the anniversary of an event set up by the authority of George III and the British Home Secretary. And I don't think Patrick White's slight towards the royal family is productive. I don't think it's productive to say...
Goons, didn't he?
Yes, I don't think it's productive to say that we're going to be eternally dependent. I can see in Australia signs of growing independence, but ultimately, if we do become a republic,
When
we do become a republic, even though that's a day to which I somewhat look forward, I would rather it happen with a fond kiss than with a slight.
Yes. Well, certainly I think Fergie has stolen the thunder from Charles and Di overnight with the announcement. In fact, she's having a baby in August. The baby's due in August, which is when she was due to come to Australia, I think. Here we have the heritage contingent, in fact, made up of Australian naval men and army guys. They're wearing the uniforms from 1788 of the Marines, and then through to the Rum Corps you're referring to earlier, Bob. The Royal Bard's going past some demonstrators there, and the Aboriginal organisers have, of course, promised that as far as they're concerned, it will be a passive, very peaceful demonstration. They have no intention of making it violent. And some of the demonstrators
this is their Anzac Day, I'd imagine. And if I were Aboriginal, I'd be out there. But I'm very happy to be a European Australian celebrating this birthday. But I have to say, if I were Aboriginal, I'd be there.
But what do we have to celebrate, in essence?
We have to celebrate something different to America. I mean, what America celebrated at its bicentenary was the preservation of certain rights conceived by the founding fathers preserved in the Constitution, continuous preservation against all the enemies. What we have to celebrate is something perhaps more modest, but nonetheless very remarkable, and it is the transformation of a continental jail into a pragmatic working democracy.
Now hear the crowd roar as they step onto the shore following Stephen Hall's announcement of their presence.
And shortly the royal salute.
Now shortly we'll have the royal salute when the royal party is led into position for that.
There are the inevitable greetings to be carried on.
Of course.
And
Sir Ninian, as you were explaining yesterday, under these circumstances actually takes precedence over Prince Charles because he is the representative of the Queen.
yes, it's one of those little nuances of protocol
Yes.
you have to be careful about, I
I
suppose.
was fascinated.
I'm sure it doesn't miff Prince of Wales. Well, I must say
And the
that
contingent to the Sudan there, you can just see behind with their white pith helmets and red jackets.
Yeah.
They were sent to the Sudan in 1885. Of course, came back in khaki helmets because they kept getting killed in red.
there's a wonderful shot of the royal couple. I must say our cameras have been able to get
The crowd is
nicely-
rising to
stay
its
nice and
feet as
close.
they cross
Yes.
the forecourt.
Yes, and the crowd is rising to their feet.
See the flags waving in the foreground. They're spontaneously standing and applauding as they cross in front of the Royal Defence Force Guard.
Of a place where inconvenient people could be transported and forgotten. There is no point now in trying to gloss over the circumstances in which the country of which you are rightly proud began. Indeed, to face those facts is a necessary part of realizing just how proud you should be. For the sad truth is that in those early days of the colony, nobody was free. The men who guarded the convicts were in prison along with them. They were all a long way from home, and they all, no doubt, thought that Australia was the worst place in the world. But the best part about the story is that they made their prison into a new home, where freedom became not just the dream of those in shackles, but a reality for everybody. It didn't happen by accident. It took the intelligence and courage of brave men and women. Even within the astonishingly brief span which covers the whole history of modern Australia, the process of making liberty an institution took time. For the original people of this land, it must all have seemed very different. And if they should say that their predicament has not yet ended, it would be hard to know how to answer, beyond suggesting that a country free enough to examine its own conscience is a land worth living in, a nation to be envied. Anyway, most people who live here now seem to think Australia is the best place in the world, and the rest of the world finds it difficult to argue.
Our marina in the background there, one of the first fleeters, the largest of the first fleeters.
She's known as the luxury vessel of the First Fleet, of course. There's a longboat alongside her as well.
By now, almost every country on earth is the old country to some family in Australia. Coming from your first old country and celebrating the 22nd anniversary to the month of my first transportation to Australia, let me say on behalf of all the lands and peoples who have contributed to your heritage that you have the best of us. Australia is its own creation, but in a very real sense, it belongs to the world. Australia is an international nation. People from anywhere feel at home here in Australia. It's that sort of place. In 2 world wars, Australians fought wholeheartedly against intolerance and tyranny. They didn't just fight for the old empire, which has now receded into history. They fought for freedom, which lasts if it is looked after and nurtured. And free men and women helped make a democracy which has become a model for the world. They didn't do it just by being good-natured and easygoing, however famous they were, and you are for those qualities. They did it by carefully writing down the laws of a reasonable and humane society. The spirit of liberty that they felt within themselves, they made legible to others. The true celebration of this nation is in its constitution, in those dry-sounding but hard fought-for rules and regulations. While I was here, I had the pommy bits bashed off me.
Rather excited Prime Minister.
Yes, with Prince Charles and also Mr. Unsworth.
Prime Minister's having a very close look there.
Aussie flags everywhere, it seems. People are enjoying themselves. It's a birthday party.
The royals are now departing, Prince Charles and Princess Diana. They'll be going to a luncheon. They'll have a brief break.
I think there's going to be a lot of people there by the sound of it too.
All right. Well, we thank you for that very much indeed. Have a lovely afternoon. Pip, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you for having us here.
Expressing your thoughts. And congratulations on the year of being an Australian, the Australian of the Year. And we'll talk in this year ahead as well.
Great.
And we thank
Happy
you very
birthday, Australia.
They've been used with great success, the fire tugs, to ensure that they could clear a passage for these tall ships as they endeavoured to clear out to sea. And there's the crew of Lewin doing the can-can.
Well, what balance, to say the least. Wouldn't get me up there in a pink fit.